Hello and welcome. I just need to check something before I start. Need to check if the sound is correct. And it seems it is. Before I start. Nice. Then I can start the game. That is. Now I'll just close Discord so now I can't chat there. Okay, where is my chat? Come on. Okay, chat. And there. Now I can start Corpse Party Blood Drive. Now I can see the chat, so feel free to message me whatever you want. As long as it's not bad things. Hey! Hey, Froggy. How are you doing? I have come pretty far in this game already. But let's start Chapter 7. Blood Drive, Chapter 7, Determination.
この世の終わりです。
The sounds of fire trucks and patrol cars echoed through the streets. The sky was dark, the air stale, and the many strong. Cold gusts of wind bore mass amounts of dust and debris. It's good that you are doing great. I didn't envy the reporter her job, as she seemed mere moments from being blown off her feet. But, to her credit, she persevered. Behind her, there was a black shadow of an old man.
お伝えしております。昨夜、治安当局の発表した全国怨霊災害の続報についてです。先日より各地で多発している不可解な死亡事件は依然収束の兆しが見えません。不審死や動機不明の無差別殺人、心霊目撃件数は増える一方です。そのため各県警は対応に苦慮。なかなか公式発表を出さない警察に報道陣は苛立ちを隠せません。
The old man's shadow in the background began acting strangely, jumping in place and making various other aimless motions.
警視庁はなるべく一人にならないように必ず3名以上で安全な場所で過ごすよう、また危険ですので外出も控えるようにと呼びかけています。
昨晩より全国各地で発生している巨大な黒い柱による出現被害につきまして、国土交通省は非常態勢の災害対策本部および警戒本部を設置しました。
Yeah, I might join the crew too later, but not now. This might take a few hours. It could be all between like 1 hour and as I experienced 4 hours. It might be even longer though. I don't really know how long this chapter is. We'll just find out. The sudden devastating appearance of the black pillars throughout Japan last night has also led the MLIT to declare a state of emergency, setting up disaster shelters and lookouts.
各地方整備局管内の情報に基づく交通・河川の被災状況および対策状況は次の通りです。
柱の成分は専門家の分析でも解析不明の未知の鉱物の結晶のようで、エンティティウォール、霊体物質と名付けられています。
Yeah. They are not really any natural objects.
地震計などでも全く予測のつかない場所に突如生えてくるため、多数の死傷者を出し、世間を混乱に陥れています。工事用カッターの刃も通らず、撤去もできない状況です。防衛庁は自衛隊の調査結果などから先日まで上空に浮かんでいた黒い球体との関連を調査しています。
新しい避難場所の情報です。避難指示の出た地域にお住まいの方は以下の情報をチェックしてください。携帯サイト、ウェブサイトでも情報を発信しております。なお、ご覧の白い地域にある体育館や学校はすでに満員です。お近くの空きのある施設へ向かってください。
っていうか、前兆も速報もなくいきなり生えてくるんだ。避難も対策もねえんだよ。運が悪けりゃ死ぬだけだ。なんで警察はいつまでも公式発表してないんだよ。編集不祥事と取られるのが嫌なのか、それとも何か隠してるのか。
The middle-aged man, the middle-aged announcer was yelling at the top of his lungs, and in absolute frenzy, he kicked his studio desk to the ground. A black shadow of a woman could be seen behind him.
委員長。
Oh. The dead friends are coming to the real world.
あゆみちゃん。篠崎さん。生き返らせてくれてありがとう。みんな。だけどもっといっぱい死んじゃったね。
The room grew dark, and each of the four figures who stood before me slowly melted into the blackness, becoming indistinct silhouettes.
持田も中島も岸沼も。
たくさん死んじゃったね。あれ、私たちも生き返ると思うの？あゆみちゃん、何がしたかったの？
I screamed and looked up. It was just a dream. I was at home watching TV. I scrunched myself up again, putting my face to my knees.
生き返るって信じてたのに、最初からダメだった。そうよ。私は全部意味のないことをしてたんだ。私どうすればいいの？生き返るって思って。生き返るって思ったから、吉江の山で行って大怪我をして、お姉ちゃんまで失って帰ってきたのに。
I raised my face from my knees, eyes red and burning. Then, as if I hadn't already had enough tragedy in my life, I heard a loud crash just outside my house. It was unmistakably a car wreck, and a rather severe one at that. The car's alarm was going off, but I was trying my best to ignore it. I didn't need this right now, so I simply wasn't going to bother with it.
.次のニュースです。公益財団法人 PL 振興社の会長が失踪しました。
The CEO is missing. Well, we all know what happened to her. She is dead. Or at least she seems to be. I'll need to get to the front door. Okay, let's go to the front door then. The car alarm outside was still going off, and it was getting harder and harder to ignore it by the second. Whoever was ringing my doorbell was really persistent. The irregular sound brought me back to reality. I crept over to the peephole and silently looked through it to see who'd be visiting me at this hour. On the other side of the door stood a man I didn't recognize. He had short hair and he was pressing the chime frantically, as if his life depended on it. I was kind of creeped out. I moved away from the peephole. The persistent ringing continued for a bit, but then finally, thankfully, came to an abrupt halt. I slowly crept back to the peephole and took another look. The man was still there. He was just pacing back and forth in place, in front of a house that, for all he knew, had no occupants. After another short while, he approached the door again, and immediately put his eye right up to the outside of the peephole. The man moved his head away, but quickly replaced it with his finger, which he swirled around and around inside the tight space, as if trying to reach my eye or poke it out. Then he stepped back from the door. I could have taken this opportunity to slowly move away from the people, but I was oddly transfixed. Of course, the second I thought that, he came back to the door yet again. And yet again he skipped the doorbell and went straight for the people. I grabbed the doorknob and was not moments away from following through with that plan when suddenly...
Ayumi? Sachiko? ダメ、開けちゃ。そいつ死者だ。
Don't open it, he's dead.
Sachiko?
I slowly turned to look at her.
涅槃は死んだ人の世界。
The Nirvana is the world of the dead.
死後の世界がこっちに来る。
And that world is coming here. Then there was an oddly familiar sound. Another car accented again right outside my door. This time, I looked outside through the people and saw the man from earlier, sandwiched between a car and the wall of one of the houses across the street. He was absolutely mangled. But after only a few moments, the man's corpse disappeared, leaving nothing but a shadow in its place on the wall and ground alike. A black stain. Not that I even really had to ask what was going on with the world, for those who might not be completely paying attention.
私が涅槃の壁を壊したから。
Yeah, it should be from the breaking down the walls of the Nirvana, yes. I wasn't just asking myself, I was asking Sachiko, whose presence still remained just behind my back. But she just looked up at me with sad eyes.
今の人も死者真っ黒になって。
No, it couldn't be. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket. I had forced myself to remain calm enough to access the photo, but then just stopped and stared.
やだ
The photo displayed on my phone, which was now on the floor. No longer had just my friends from before with blacked out faces, but Mochida, Nakashima and Kishinuma as well. I pounded the floor with both hands and shuddered violently.
悔い改めよ。
Thou shalt repent!
世界は終わりに近づいている。
The end of the world is nigh!
神は不浄なる不心得者を決してお許しにはならぬ。
God shall not forgive those who art unclean and indiscreet. Some cultist group was speaking on TV. I guess the news must have ended at some point when I wasn't paying attention.
世界の終わり。
This time, I was just plain talking to myself.
そう終わりよ。まさかヤゴウラの最後の生き残りが自爆覚悟でこんなこと考えてるなんてね。
Magari appeared in my hallway. I had no idea how long she'd been there, nor how she'd gotten in. I noticed she still had her heels on though. It's you. I stood up, and Sachiko was, as always, waiting in the wings behind me.
幸せの石で帰ってこれたわ。金付き堂の階段から吹き抜けを落ちてる間にね。まあ天神症が壊れたからこの石は使えないけど。
To demonstrate, Magari snapped the two together.
涅槃よ、死人を迎えよ。ほらね。
I probably flinched, but she was right. Nothing happened.
世界はもう数刻のうちに混沌に包まれて死の世界になる。あっけないでしょ。まさにこの世の終わりってやつ。ちなみにあれ私の教団アレンジでしょ。我ながら引くわ。
She pulled back her chin and flashed me a strained smile.
ああ、そういえばあなたの親もイカれて入信してたわよ。
Yeah, her parents went crazy and joined. This day couldn't have been much worse for me.
あなたこのままでいいわけ？
Magari wasn't mincing words, it seemed. I held my head in both hands and looked down at the ground.
責任を感じてるならちょっと顔貸しなさい。あんたの血に話がある。
Something to discuss about bloodline. Magari approached me and grabbed my arm. Sachiko, still right behind me, began to growl like a guard dog.
話してよ。どうして私なんか友達も救えない？何もできない。篠崎の血だか知らないけど、私にできることなんて何もないよ。大体涅槃をこの世に出したのはヨシエさんが最初にやったことじゃない。
I screamed, as loudly and as fiercely as I could.
私悪くないじゃない。
I closed my eyes and cried the hardest I've ever cried, sobbing so intensely that I found myself nearly hyperventilating. Magari slapped me down to the ground.
ムカつく女ね。あなた等身大すぎるわ。少しは格好つけようとなさいよ。
I held my cheek and continued sobbing. Magari was looking down on me with contempt in her eyes, but also a certain intensity that seemed more akin to desperation than anything.
篠崎あゆみ、真実を一つ教えるわ。7番目の柱、知識のセフィラの軌道を止められなかった時点でもう世界の終わりは動かない。だけど
Once the seventh pillar, the Sephirot of knowledge, starts up, it's all over. The end of the world is carved in stone. This is not hentai. Magari closed in on me, as if our lips were about to touch. Sachiko growled again, but Magari was clearly not intimidated in the slightest.
ブック・オブ・シャドウズはまだ失われていない。
The Book of Shadows is not gone.
あの本を手にした篠崎の血を引くあなたならミストとまだ戦えるかもしれないわ。
I was still hesitating, and Magari apparently didn't much like that.
ふざけやがって。
Suddenly, Magari was pulling up the top of my uniform. My plump, white stomach was now fully exposed.
クソったれの本はここにあるわ。
She pointed to a spot just below my belly button. And she did so. As she did so, my stomach started growling with an unearthly roar and shifted in place slightly. It was almost like there was a snake slithering around inside of me.
まったくもっと早く気づけばよかったわ。篠崎義恵の家の地下で力を使ってからそこに潜り込んで眠ってやがったのよ、そいつは。
Magari crossed her arms and snorted.
ただしあくまで入れ物で中身は空っぽだけどね。生意気にうなってやんの。
The growl that came from within my own body sounded like that of a wild beast.
まさか本当に？
ほんとすっかり騙されたわ。私は本来教団からあなたがあの空間でブック・オブ・シャドウズを手に入れるためのサポート役、それとその他雑用のために派遣されていたのよ。
なの。
って言っても手に入れた瞬間奪い取るつもりだったけどね。
She was trying to help her get the book and then steal it from her. Pretty simple plan, but it didn't work out.
まあそれも今となってはどうでもいいわ。世界が壊れるのなら教団の継承権もクソもないし。ただね、ムカつくのよ。ミストよ、ミスト。あれで勝ったつもりでいるなんて笑っちゃうわよね。そんなあいつを思いっきりなぶり殺してやりたいでしょ。
Don't you just want to slaughter Mister like a pig right now?
あなたも甘ったれずにできることに目を向けなさい。可能性を放棄するのは死んだ後でいい。
My eyes began to well up yet again.
私にまだ何かできることがあるの。
Magari's expression turned deathly serious.
なんとしてもブック・オブ・シャドウズを体の外に出して支配なさい。本があなたの覚悟を認めれば自然と出てくるわ。
Do whatever you can to bring that book of shadows out of your body and gain control over it. If the book recognizes your determination, it should extract itself naturally.
そして本の力があればミストのいる涅槃にもう一度乗り込む道も示されるでしょうよ。
I could only stare incredulously at my abdomen. Magari took this opportunity to open my front door, again to illustrate her point. Outside the weather was still completely anomalous, with hurricane-like winds and debris clouds everywhere. The clouds up above too were moving abnormally fast through a disconcerting blood-red sky. Every few seconds, a sound not unlike a spark plug firing could be heard echoing from the distance, as another black flame ignited and burned itself out in some random spot.
どのみちあなたも世界と共に滅びて死ぬわ。だったら見せてみなさい。その前にあなたの覚悟を。黒魔術から生まれたその本は残酷と血を好むわ。
The book was born from black magic. It adores cruelty and blood. With those parting words, Magari disappeared into the city, the sounds of her heels clacking softer and softer until they were no longer audible at all. Sachiko and I could do nothing but see her off. The entire nation was now plagued with entity balls and black silhouette-like spirits of the dead. The entity walls were rapidly destroying schools, downtown bypasses and other crucial traffic cornerstones, and even rescue shelters, creating countless new causalities by the minute. People were running in the streets, panicked and confused, and almost certainly not much longer for this earth.
いいから走れ！潰される！海も空も動いてないよ！
Meanwhile, in Miss Kuon's office, the black-suited agents watched in horror as each TV monitor displayed a feed from a different news network across the world, and the story was exactly the same on all of them.
会長、私たちはどうすればよいのですか？
Boss, what are we supposed to do? How is a book supposed to recognize my determination? What the hell am I supposed to do? Okay. Now I can move. Let's save. Is this a knife here? But I want to explore the rest of the house. At least what I can of it first. There's nothing I need to do in here right now. I don't have any reason to go into the kitchen right now. The reflection in the mirror looks exactly like a whole other person. Ragged hair, pale skin and an expression of utter disdain are the standout features. Every channel is reporting almost non-stop of the nationwide ghost disaster state that's in effect. Too bad no one seems to have any worthwhile information to contribute though. There's no reason for me to go upstairs right now. Okay, I have done everything, I think. Alright, wait a minute. What about these things? No, they don't do anything. Let's search the cabinet. There are numerous books on the shelves relating to magic and the occult. Hinoa had quite a collection. Sis. Okay, let's do the knife thing.
お姉ちゃん、私に力を貸して。
Sis, give me strength. In front of the mirror dresser sat Hino's Zodiac's dagger. I gripped it in terror, closed my eyes and started shaking.
なんとしても、ブックオブシャドウズを体の外に出して支配なさい。
Do whatever you can to bring that book of shadows out of your body and gain control over it.
黒魔術から生まれたその本は残酷と血を好むわ。
Just remember, the book was born from black magic and it adores cruelty and blood. I couldn't back down now. I lifted the dagger in front of me, poised to plunge it into my body and carve myself open as samurai once did in the ritualistic suicide called seppuku. But I couldn't go through with it. I was too scared of death, too scared of the pain. The face that reflected back at me in the mirror was twisted with fear. I didn't even recognize myself. But I could see in those eyes all the weight that had been... Oops. I accidentally skipped a lot of things. But I could see in those eyes all the weight that had been put on my shoulders, all the responsibility I'd been forced to bear. I'm a coward. I'm small and weak. The world doesn't need me. I want to be missed. But I can make a difference, here and now. Ah! My mind was made up. I lifted the dagger again, only to bring it halfway to its destination before halting its descent once more. No matter how determined I was, no matter how strong my conviction, this was literally suicide. I knew what had to be done, but knowing and accepting are two different things. I began crying like a baby. This was the most afraid I'd ever been in my entire life, and almost certainly the most afraid I would ever be. I ever will be. At this point, the only way I'd be able to go through with it was to clear my mind and let my arms make the emotions automatically. And before I knew it, that's exactly what I did. Snick. It's most likely because I wasn't thinking about it, or anything else for that matter, that the dagger found absolutely no resistance. It was like applying excess force to slice a cake. For a very brief moment I felt nothing, but then the convulsions started, first in my abdomen, then quickly spreading up to the rest of my body. My abdomen was now spasming and constricting involuntarily. And the rest of me wasn't faring much better. My entire body was in a total chaos. The extent of the agony I felt at that moment was absolutely impossible to convey. It was all-encompassing. I was utterly incapable of focusing on anything else. My lower body was spewing bright red blood, thick black blood, and an unknown yellow substance, all of which were blending together into a slurry that was at its core my life essence. This went far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The sheer shock of it rendered my mind a jumble that I simply could not untangle. I knew there was a reason I'd done this to myself, something I absolutely had to do, and it was crucial, but regaining enough cognitive function to do it would be a challenge. My head was swimming as I tried beyond all reasonable measure to hang on to consciousness just long enough to complete the task at hand. I could still see my face in the mirror, but only just, as the blood that had been spurting from my abdomen had largely glazed it over. It was a truly frightful sight, comparable to, if not more disturbing than anything I'd seen in Heavenly Host. I felt feeble, helpless, and the face in the mirror was smiling at me for it, darkly, obscenely. You can't do it. Jet black crows flew by outside the window. And in that moment a fire sparked within me. Feeling oddly resolute, I gripped the dagger jutting out from my abdomen. And yanked it to the side with every last bit of strength I had left in me. The spray of blood gushing out of me became almost exponentially more violent. Most surprisingly, it seemed like equal amounts of blood were rushing to my brain as well, and the effect was feeling like the blood vessels in my head were on the verge of bursting. But just as I felt like I was a moment from my final blackout, I saw something. There among my own entrails, on the ground, was a blood-drenched tome. It was the Book of Shadows, without question. My vision blurred from the intense loss of blood, and even more intense pain. I fell forward, unable to maintain any semblance of balance any longer. And I landed right on it, with a loud, warm, and unpleasant splash, my face planted firmly into the book, which was steaming under the odd temperature differentials of my viscera. I awoke with a start. I was still at Hinoa's room. Instinctively and frantically, I looked down at my abdomen. There, I saw a scar resembling the ones I'd almost died from during the blowback at Yoshi Shinosaki's house, runic lettering and all. But that was it. The bleeding had stopped. In fact, there was no blood anywhere in the room, and on the floor in front of me sat the Book of Shadows. Not a copy, but the original. I slowly touched it, and from behind me, Sachiko spoke.
本が歩みを持ち主と認めたの。
The book has acknowledged you as its owner. She was staring at me with a docile, almost reverent look in her eyes. I picked up the book and looked at it, fear and awe running through my now clear head. It grumbled a bit, darting its eyes back and forth. Eventually, it seemed to settle on a specific direction, locking its gaze. It seemed to be looking out the window. What is that?
きっと涅槃の入り口。
The entrance to the Nirvana.
あの方向、如月学園だわ。帰ってきてたの？もうお父さん。
世界はもう終わりました。
世界はもう終わりました。
お父さん、お母さん。
Best to not speak to them.
きっと私帰ってくるからね。
This video. Sachiko looked at me with sweet, innocent eyes. When I arrived at Kisuragi Academy, I got a much better look at the phenomenon. It was like a whirlpool with a red, dully shining hole in its center. In its center was the entrance to the hereafter.
あの先に涅槃が。動的魔法？魔女みたいに空を飛ぶの？嘘だ。
I closed my eyes, clasped the Book of Shadows tightly in both hands, and prayed.
ブックオブシャドウズ、力を貸して。
When I opened my eyes again and looked up into the sky, my body began to float. I was in control of the Book of Shadows. I was a legitimate practicer of magic now. This moment felt almost like an awakening to endless new possibilities.
これ本当に飛んでる。すごい。
And right next to me, flying by my side, was Sachiko.
あゆみ
The momentary loss of focus dropped me out of my trance, and I immediately began falling. I gripped the book even tighter, and concentrated harder than before, and sure enough, I began rising up toward the vortex once more.
あゆみ気をつけて。あなたが力を使えるのはその本のおかげ。絶対離しちゃダメ。
わかったわ。
As I flew higher, I could see Magari sitting on the roof of the school.
ブックオブシャドウズを従えたようね。見直したわ、篠崎あゆみ。それにしても如月学園の真上に涅槃へのエスカレーターがあるなんてね。ついでにもう一つ教えてやるとね、涅槃がこの世界に侵食してつながってしまったの。別にあなただけのせいじゃない。涅槃天神症がこの世に発生してしまった時点で、いいえ、もっと以前にブックオブシャドウズが生み出されてしまった時に、いつかこの時が来ることは決まっていた。
I looked into Magari's face. She was being completely sincere.
その本の元の所有者も篠崎義恵もみんなそれを食い止めようと、あるいは遅らせようと必死だったの。それが次世代へつなぐだけの運命であってもね。そうやって代々受け継いできたのよ。
そうだったの。
だから言ってみれば、あなたがいようといまいといずれこうなったわ。ただあなたの行為はあの狂信者集団ヤゴウラ教会の生き残りミストに涅槃のパワーを与えてしまった。その責任は取らなきゃいけないわ。責任。あなたには本物のブックオブシャドウズがある。天神症で分散していた涅槃の力はミストの持つ偽物に取り込まれてしまった。でもそれを取り戻してその本に封印すれば、あんなもの簡単に吹っ飛ばせるわ。そして涅槃のコアをも迎え入れられたなら、その本は完璧なものとなる。さあ反撃よ。食らわしてやりなさい。世界が
Go
終
in there and
わる
fuck him
前
up.
に一発ぐらい本物の実力ってやつをね。私は見ているわ。
Magari grew smaller as I climbed higher and higher, and as I looked up, I could see the threshold looming ever larger, poised as if to wrap itself around me.
怖い？死ぬの怖い？
I smiled at her, and to my surprise, it was a genuine smile. Somehow or another, I was feeling very calm. Sachiko looked at me with wide eyes.
どうしたの？
She turned away briefly, then looked over at me once more. It almost seemed like in that brief moment, she'd changed expressions, in much the way someone would change a suit.
あゆみ、怖いのはサチと涅槃のコアにいる人。気をつけて。
反のコアにいる人？それはミストじゃなくて。
うん、別にいる。
I looked back up to find myself practically right on top of the hole in the sky that stood in front of the abnormally huge red moon. And with my convictions settled, I jumped in. The harsh flash, the nausea, and the wrenching tightness in my chest caused me to lose consciousness for a second. But then I awoke to find that heaven and earth had switched places. It looked as though I were falling head first into a massive storm with flashing lightning and roaring thunder. It almost seemed like I was previewing what the world would look like after its destruction. In the sky there was an enormous face of a doll, and the walls around me were all made of flesh. I clenched the Book of Shadows with both hands as I slowly made my landing in this new version of the Nirvana. It was a mountain of rubble.
何これ？完全に壊れてる。何よもう。
あゆみ、大丈夫？
平気だよ。これくらい。
I slowly, carefully found my footing and pulled myself back up to my feet. This was an entirely different heavenly host. It bore almost no resemblance whatsoever to any version of the school we'd traversed previously.
天神小学校がこんな姿に。みんなは町田くん、中島さん、岸沼くん、クオン先生、愛子さん。
I called out to my friends, but received no answer. All I could hear was the rumbling and twisting of the air around me. A name tag rests beside the corpse. Kitashiro High Class 32 Kazuki Munakata. Crushed by a piece of the school. And there's everyone. There was no mistaking it. In the midst of the wreckage, pieces of clothing from Kishinuma, Mochida, Nakashima, Miskuon, and Aiko were clearly visible. And the unfortunate souls who were wearing this clothing were all buried under fallen beams and other debris, and surrounded by a veritable sea of blood. I knelt down and began sobbing uncontrollably. Sachiko stared at me as I continued to scream and cry.
あゆみ、幸子頑張ってみる。天神小学校の運命だったらちょっとなら戻せるかもしれない。
Sachiko produced a calavera necklace from her pocket. The skeletal figure on the chain made a slight hollow clinking sound as it was handled, very much as actual bone would. It looked handmade and seemed oddly warm, like a keepsake.
それは
I had this weird feeling that I'd seen this object somewhere before.
どこかで見たことあるような思い出せない
I know where it's from. It's from Corpse Party's Sweet Sachiko's hysteric birthday bash. Though she was looking down at the ground a bit, slightly guilty and slightly guarded, Sachiko giggled slightly. That's a lot of words, that's a lot of like this.
これ幸子の宝物
A big smile crept across her lips, and for a moment she looked every bit the part of an ordinary little girl. I was confused. Sachiko placed her hand on the Book of Shadows. Fucked loop. And the book spoke,
同じ日を繰り返せ
followed by Sachiko. Suddenly, I was in Yoshi Shinosaki's clinic. The very same clinic Nakashima and I had visited on that fateful day.
この人はよしえさん
I was viewing Sachiko's memory of an event from long ago. Yoshi was writing something in her journal.
アナグラムの解析を進めると、この本に書かれている術はすべて実体の伴わない理論でしかなかった。成功例に関する文献も全く存在しない。私はなんと愚かなことをしてしまったのだろう。最初から成功しないものに心血を注いでいたなんて。本の中身である涅槃が飛び出し、異空間を作ってしまうだけの失敗作の術。しかもそこに囚われた死者は生きていた証、存在の痕跡すらも消されてしまう。
Sachiko came into the room from the back. Her eyes met with Yoshi's, and she smiled.
だが、飛び出した涅槃を抑え込むことができたため。
Sachiko stood obediently by her mother, wearing the white dress we'd seen on her in Heavenly Host. Yoshi patted her on the head approvingly. Sachiko then coughed out a fine black mist, but sucked it back into her mouth like a carp.
失われ、黒く消えたあの人の存在だけは取り戻せたのだ。
The face on the image was blacked out, like those of Seiko and the others. However, to my surprise, the black marking was slowly peeling itself away, revealing the features underneath. I said how long it tends to be, like from an hour to multiple hours. I can't give any clearer information about that than what I just did. My vision slowly cleared, and when it did, amidst all the rumbling and shaking, I found myself back in Heavenly Host Elementary.
これは
Then promptly, Sachiko collapsed to the ground. Without thinking, I picked her up and held her limp, light body in my arms. She must have used up her spirit energy, as she was clearly drained. She was breathing, but only very slightly.
苦しさ私幸子に触れてる
Sachiko was real. She had to have been, or I wouldn't have been able to hold onto. Or I wouldn't have been able to hold onto her like this. She seemed injured, but not in any traditional manner. There were cracks running through her body, each one emanating an unearthly blue, almost gaseous, something, light. Meanwhile, the school itself was also cracking and breaking all around me, making an incredible noise. The roof above began to crumble away, providing glimpses of the real world. And incredibly, the entity walls hadn't spawned there yet.
戻ってる。まだみんなが死ぬ前だ。幸子、しっかりして。あゆき、ごめん。幸子、あんまり時間戻せなかった。幸子、ありがとう。偉いね。頑張ったね。
I could hardly believe it. I just complimented Sachiko, of all people, on a job well done. Her newly formed physical body was rapidly beginning to evaporate into mist. My voice was trembling, though I suspect it was less with fear and more with confusion.
すごいわ。あなたはいい子よ。
She looked up into the sky, eyes beginning to well with tears. She was struggling to speak. Soon she wouldn't be able to speak. Soon she wouldn't be able to at all.
謝りたかった。
She barely had any voice left, but was persevering. Nonetheless, this was clearly something she didn't want to leave unsaid, no matter what.
許してもらえないのは分かってる。けど、謝りたかった。
And with that, she began full on crying. I couldn't help doing the same.
たくさんの人殺しちゃった。幸子、いい子じゃない。褒められちゃいけない子。
The tears were streaming down my face now. Sachiko's voice was so mournful, so genuine.
たくさんの人を救ったわ。ありがとう。
A massive earthquake shook the ground. Sachiko looked scared, so I patted her head and hugged her tightly. She then looked me squarely in the eye, gripping her calavera necklace tightly in her hand as if it were a rosary.
不思議だよ。正しいって分かったら成仏するの怖くない？幸子。
Sachiko and the blue light alike both disappeared completely. She was gone. The being I was hugging just moments ago no longer existed. All I could do was clench my fist and mourn. The look on Sachiko's face when she asked if I was scared of dying kept flashing through my head. I kept my head hung low for a moment, then stood up and wiped the tears from my eyes. Accompanying the sound of rumbling, one single entity wall now stood in the real world. The cycle was beginning anew.
見守っていて、幸子。篠崎の末裔の私を。
褒める。いいわ。最後。
Chapter 7, Determination, to be continued. This was a short one, and not very much gameplay. But yeah, there was a lot of story elements in this one. Setting up for the redemption. EVP entries for Yui Shishido have been unlocked. EVP entries for Mayo Susumoto has been unlocked. EVP entries for Sachiko Shinsaki have been unlocked. EVP entries for Sakutaro Morishige have been unlocked. Soulful testimony from Ikue Otani have been unlocked. New Encyclopedia Obscura entries have been unlocked. Calaverdo, Sachiko's family photo, Sachiko Shinsaki. Yoshi Shinsaki fact loop. X chapter 5 has been unlocked. Yes, I would like to save. I want to check if I was correct about that birthday bash thing. I know that the kiss is... Okay, it doesn't say here, but should be from there. Well, that's everything. I'll see you.